The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been working on an initiative called Engineering with Nature. It all started in 2010. And this is the EWN Podcast. EWN is developing and implementing nature-based solutions for water and infrastructure projects. It's bringing together a growing international community of scientists, engineers, and researchers from all kinds of disciplines that are committed to harnessing the power of nature to solve problems. The EWN Podcast tells their stories. Now here's your host, Sarah Thorne of Decision Partners.
From Iowa to Australia to Finland, and most recently Norway, our guest has followed her passion to integrate her love for nature with engineering and technology to create solutions that, as she says, are workable in lots of different situations, including cold regions. Sounds a lot like engineering with nature. Welcome to Season 7, Episode 12. I'm here with Jeff King, lead of the Engineering with Nature program, and Laura Wendling. Laura is a senior research scientist at Sintef Community in Trondheim, Norway. Jeff, you met Laura at a conference focused on nature-based solutions a few months ago, and you came back and said to me, we really need to get her on the podcast.
I certainly did. I met Laura at an event at the American Society of Civil Engineers headquarters building in Reston, Virginia. And it was an event that was focused on nature-based solutions to address climate change, specifically in cold regions. And Laura gave this amazing presentation, and I was sitting there just listening very intently and quickly scribbled down a note that said, must have Laura on the EWN podcast. And so now she's here, and we are so grateful to have you today, Laura.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really flattered by the introduction. I sometimes wonder if, when I give a presentation, if anyone's actually listening.
They're listening today. How about that?
Well, clearly you had a big fan in the audience, Laura, and I know that our listeners are going to be really interested in everything that you have to talk about. Laura, we want to start by talking about your background, your passion for nature that's really shaped your whole career. And of course, for Jeff and I, the burning question is, how on earth did you get from Idaho to Norway?
Well, that is a good question, and I think a lot of the people close to me would ask the same question. It was a circuitous route, we'll put it that way. So I have always been interested in nature. The world around me, I think, has always fascinated me, and I've wanted to know why things work and how they work. And then as I got older, I wanted to know, how do we make it better? Or why isn't it working the way we want it to? So I think when I was in high school, if you really liked science, there were not so many options that were considered mainstream. So I studied biology with the idea that I'd probably be a doctor, and then realized that I really liked soil a whole lot better than I liked medicine. Yeah, I know. They're not exactly two things that are very similar. But to me, soil science was so exciting because it brought together everything I'd been learning about biology and physics and chemistry and biochemistry and microbiology, and it put it in this environmental system where it was so complex, and it had solid and liquid and gaseous phases, and I was hooked. I mean, that was it. So I decided, instead of being a doctor, I was going to be a soil scientist. And I think my parents may have questioned that a bit, at least at first. But I went to Idaho to study soil science at the University of Idaho. And then I continued studying soil science because I love being at school at Washington State University. And then I worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for a year on a soil science project that was fascinating. It actually linked soil science with human health, believe it or not. We were looking at the effects of windblown dust emissions, and one of the effects is on human health. So it all came full circle. But then how did I get to Australia? I had an opportunity. There was an opportunity for a postdoc at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization in Adelaide, Australia. And I thought, this will be so much fun. I mean, I'll go for a couple years and I'll have this great experience in Australia, and then I'll come home. So, of course, I stored my things at my mother's house, my parents' house, and then I went and lived in Australia for, I think, 13 years.
And then you ended up in Finland and now Norway.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, it was a circuitous route. I like the European innovation domain, I guess. It's an interesting place to be a researcher. There's lots of opportunities for collaboration. And I wanted to be part of it. Not that we don't have the same sorts of opportunity as elsewhere. It was just, for some reason, it really appealed to me. It was very exciting. I went to VTT Research Center in Finland on a 6-month research exchange, and I liked the people and the culture and the nature, and I liked that innovation was such a big part of the culture. The idea that we could take risks and try new things. So that's how I came to Europe.
And Laura, I believe you were in Finland giving the presentation when I met you at the ASCE event. And then more recently, you moved over to Norway. Is that right?
Yeah, I was. I was in Finland up until the end of February this year. So I've just started working at Sintef in Trondheim, Norway, in March. So I'm very new to the Norwegian research area.
Well, I think that your travels speak volumes in terms of your curiosity and your desire to learn from a great many people. And I am so envious. My wife and I, we actually took a trip to Norway, and this was back in, I believe it was 2016. And we had wanted to go because we had always had this curiosity about the Northern Lights. And we had a chance to visit Trondheim and then also get into the Kirkenes. And it was during the month of January, so obviously very, very cold, but just plain beautiful in every way, shape, and form. And actually inspired me on many levels. I have always had a fascination with cold region environments. And that trip to Norway was the catalyst that actually spurred us to ultimately move to Maine. So being in the U.S., but having an opportunity to experience more of those winter months.
That's exciting. If you like winter, Maine and Norway are probably good places to be.
That's
And Jeff,
right.
I'm pretty sure you have seen more of Norway than I have now with your travels. But I'm actually later this week going to get the opportunity to see some of that area near where you were in northern Norway. I'm going to be in Vesterålen at the Gaia Arctic Summit.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
focusing on how we can all come together to accelerate transition to climate resilience in the global Arctic.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. And we want to stay posted on what happens at the Gaia Arctic Summit. You'll have to let us know, Laura, how it goes and what some of the outcomes were. I have to say, Norway is definitely a place that I've always wanted to go, and I may just have an opportunity to go next year. If I do, I'll be in touch because you'll know your way around by then.
That's it. Hopefully, that's my plan.
I hope so. So, Laura, we're interested in hearing what really sparked your deep interest in what you say is innovating with nature to create a sustainable and resilient future.
Well, okay, this is a really good question. As an undergraduate, I worked in an aquatic ecology research lab where we were studying constructed wetlands. I say we, I was an undergraduate research assistant, so I was helping. But the researchers there were studying constructed wetlands as a way to purify water from agricultural runoff, and then looking at differences between the constructed wetlands and natural wetlands in the prairie pothole region. And that really got me interested in understanding how we could design natural or pseudo-natural systems that worked as well or almost as well as the natural system itself, like a real ecosystem. And so I guess when I learned about nature-based solutions, it all kind of stems from a very strong appreciation for ecological engineering and ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. And then I learned about nature-based solutions, or the concept, in 2016 when I moved to Finland. And it was like an aha moment for me suddenly to have the added emphasis on stakeholder engagement and engaging people right from the beginning and making sure that we plan it such that we're deriving social and economic benefit in addition to these core targets. What usually the core target is achieving some kind of ecological outcome. It just made so much sense to me that we could work across disciplines, in a transdisciplinary way to bring in the very best knowledge and expertise from all these different people, these different communities that don't typically work together. And what we have is a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. And that really excites me.
Well, Laura, you're in good company today, because everything you just described speaks volumes in terms of your affinity for engineering with nature. So many cross-cutting interests and priorities in how we do business. So I am just tickled to hear you reference all of those things that inspire you. And just sort of thinking through this a little bit and knowing that you have studied in the U.S., you've been in Australia, Finland, now Norway. You've had exposure to so many diverse ecosystems and so many different people. I just feel like those opportunities to learn in all those many different environments are going to serve you well, both now and in the future. And you're going to continue to be a leader in this space. I just know it.
Gosh, Jeff, I really hope so. I think the more I learn, the more people that I interact with, all these super high level experts who know things that, I feel like I'm getting a glimpse. And at times I feel like a jack of all trades and master of few. But it's exciting. And I think we need more of this. We need people to
Yes, we
work
do.
in areas where they feel a little bit uncomfortable. But the one point that I want to make is, and the thing that I like about nature-based solutions as a field is that we're working in places where we may not know a lot, but we know our limitations and we can bring in the people from these other disciplines, but also that technology plays an important part. And understanding
It
that it's not an
does.
either or question, that we're not saying either you have a nature-based solution or you have a traditionally engineered solution. We're bringing together the best knowledge from everything to create nature-based and hybrid solutions that work for everybody.
And
So,
can work in different environments, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. Something that you learned about in one environment, one kind of ecosystem, it really is challenging to think about, well, how could we apply what we learned there in a new situation? So very innovative. It's very exciting. We're very excited for
absolutely.
you, Laura. We want to-
I'm excited for all of us because we have an opportunity to learn and grow, and it's not ever going to go away. We just keep learning new things and building on it.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Laura, I think it would be really helpful if you could put into context how climate change is affecting cold regions, including the Arctic. And if you could talk about some of the critical challenges, it really sets us up to talk about some of the nature-based solutions that you've been working on and that you're going to be working on.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you ask that because a European Environment Agency report on the impacts of climate change recently came out, and it's really sparked a lot of interest and conversation, I guess, discourse around what do we know and where do we still have knowledge gaps. But I think if we look at, the latest IPCC sixth assessment report, there's a lot of discussion in there about the Arctic in particular because it's warming at a rate that's far greater than the rest of the world. I think it's 3 to 4 times the rate of warming that's observed elsewhere. And there's been profound effects, possibly irreversible in some cases, on terrestrial, aquatic, freshwater, marine ecosystems and the cryosphere. So we know that this is an area that's in urgent need of climate change adaptation. Nature-based solutions are one of the things that may play a role here in supporting, I guess, the conservation, protection, and restoration of the ecosystems that have been subject to such pressure from a changing climate. And it's quite an interesting problem because the people who live in these areas have been disproportionately affected as well by the changing climate. The biggest change in general across the northern part of Europe is that we're getting warmer and wetter, and most of our new precipitation or additional precipitation will happen in the winter. The problem there is that we may not necessarily be able to capture that water or infiltrate it. So we're likely to still have issues with hydrologic drought in the summer. It's all just it's changing everywhere. The problems are unique in different areas, but the north is predicted to be warmer and wetter. The Arctic is changing more rapidly than anywhere else on Earth, and profoundly impacting the populations that depend very strongly on ecosystem services for primary industries.
That's right. Laura, I certainly know a little bit of what you're talking about. And with the Engineering with Nature program, we supported a indigenous community up in Point Hope, Alaska. And we had a project there working with some of my colleagues at the National Research Council in Canada, as well as with EA Engineering, Science, and Technology, and then also ERDIC with the Cold Regions Research Engineering Laboratory and the Environmental Laboratory and the Coastal and Hydraulics Lab. And that community is really at risk here in terms of loss of the community itself and all of those cultural significant pieces of their community and how they identify with themselves. And it's a challenge. It really is, because of the loss of the ice sheets and having more intense storms, and now this exacerbated impact derived from erosion. And so we do have a real serious need in these cold regions, these Arctic communities, and we have to come up with strategies, innovative strategies that really do bring all these disciplines together, including being able to work with those indigenous communities to integrate traditional ecological knowledge. And that becomes so critical as well, to being able to create a sustainable solution that really does advance the needs and the priorities that have been identified by these indigenous communities. Laura, as you continue to work in your area, and I know now that with where you are and what you're doing, you've got this perfect opportunity to make a difference. And recently you took on this role of senior scientist within the SINTEF community in Norway. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, sure. I guess first, as you say, it's a tragedy, I think, the impacts of climate change, but it is a really great opportunity to learn more and to apply everything that we've learned to date to try to mitigate these impacts and make the future better, brighter for the communities that rely on natural resources in particular for a livelihood. But as you say, Jeff, I like the point that you made about integrating indigenous and local knowledge into all of our solutions. So that everybody has a voice, not only in what we do, but how we do it and how we manage or govern the solutions in the long term. So where I work at SINTEF, I'm in the SINTEF community department, and it's one of the institutes within SINTEF, the company. Our institute focuses on sustainable development of primarily buildings and infrastructure, mobility solutions. But there's also a department, my group, which the group I'm in focuses on water and environment. So everything related to water cycle services, water management, and I guess the broader sort of environmental issues associated with climate change.
It sounds really, really interesting. And I think that one of the things that we wanted you to talk about, Laura, was what's the role of nature-based solutions that you see? What's the opportunity in water-based solutions? Talk a bit about that.
That's a good question. I mean, nature-based solutions are so broad, right? So we have this definition, this current definition from the United Nations Environment Assembly that says nature-based solutions are actions to conserve, protect, restore, sustainably use, and manage ecosystems and their services, including biodiversity for human well-being, basically for the benefit of mankind. So it's a pretty broad sphere of work. I think that nature-based solutions are powerful because we harness the power of nature instead of fighting against nature. We determine what nature does best and work with it, work with the ecosystems and with the landscape to manage either excess water or drought, to manage the extreme events. and in the longer term to adapt to these long-term changes in when we will receive water, how much, what we need to do to adjust how we manage water. I guess the question was about water, right?
Well, and about what you're going to be working on. I think that really sounds like music to our ears, Jeff. It sounds a lot like engineering with nature, which we actually came up with that term quite a long time ago, Laura, 2010.
Wow.
And at the time, it was pretty controversial. People thought, oh, that's kind of a weird idea. But I think, as Jeff can tell you, it's now pretty mainstream. It really picks up what you're talking about. Just thinking first about nature.
That's absolutely right. And certainly, again, another testimony to why we needed to have Laura on our show.
Yeah.
And it's very much what she's doing, her vision and direction she's headed. It very much aligns with engineering with nature.
Absolutely. Laura, can you give us a couple of examples of the kind of projects that you're working on?
Sure. I guess the project that I talk most about, and what you probably find if you Google me, is Unilab, or Urban Nature Labs. And there we didn't have an Arctic demonstration per se, but we had a large-scale demonstration in a boreal climate. So we looked at how nature-based solutions can be used to manage water and climate in a small city, about 230,000 people, in Tampere in Finland. And the interesting thing, or the very unique thing about Tampere, is it's a city on an isthmus of land between two very large oligotrophic lakes. And so there's an urgent need to protect the quality of the water that's running off the urban area. So we had an opportunity to trial different types, pilot different types of nature-based solutions to see how well they worked, how well they work, the efficiency or the effectiveness in managing stormwater. There was already a very large stormwater management system that was, I guess you'd call it an engineered solution. It's a stormwater retention pond. It's concrete and natural materials, but it was very popular with the local population. People like to go sit by it, and that it brought a lot of wildlife into the area. So we added on to this in Urban Nature Labs, and there was work to remeander a stream and create an alluvial meadow that attached to this original stormwater system. We built a wetland and some biofilters. We'd built a lot of different types of biofilters. One was to clean the runoff from the dog park. I'm sure you can imagine what that contained. The other was for subsurface treatment of leachate from an old landfill. So before the leachate would reach the local lake, it would go through this biofilter. It was really exciting work. The local community seems to be using the stuff that we implemented. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, I think, from all corners. Oh, and we trialed this different plants on a Nordic green wall. So we seem to always see the same plant species, and they're not necessarily species that are very well adapted to living in Tampere. So in Tampere, we went out and collected a bunch of plants that were going to be removed, or I guess possibly destroyed in an area that was developing, and put them up on a wall that's now 8 meters in height, and capturing water from the roof of this building, and then running it back through, using that water to water the green wall. But looking at how native species that are endemic to this boreal area can work in a green wall. And so we have this beautiful biodiverse green wall. It's attracting pollinators, and it looks lovely, and we're very excited about it.
Well, Laura, maybe we could get you to give us a picture that we could post along with this podcast so our listeners can see this. It sounds remarkable, and I know I would be very interested in seeing it as well. And then, Laura, this is very intriguing to me, and it gets me thinking again about how much you've traveled and the different ecosystems that you've worked in, and now thinking about where you are now. Is there some, comparison and maybe thinking about what you've seen or observed or what's happening in this space of nature-based solutions, and then compare that to, say, what you're seeing now in cold regions, or perhaps in Finland, or now where you reside in Norway. What's sort of the similarity, and then also maybe some of the contrast there? What's the difference that you've observed?
I think that there's probably more commonalities than there are differences, even when we're working in very, very different environments. So I was living in Australia for quite a while during the Millennium Drought, as an example, which is
Mm.
so quite hot and dry and a little bit different from Norway. But fundamentally, we're all trying to manage our environments so that we can retain water on the landscape when we need it, so that we have adequate water for drinking and washing, and that we have environmental water. Like I said, I think that we're more similar than we are different. We're just applying some of the same principles in different environments. And when we move to from an environment like Australia to somewhere like Finland or Norway, we have more limitations in terms of growing season and the rate of chemical reactions. For example, our microbial activity is going to be much slower when it is 5 degrees than it is when it's 25. So
That's right.
we have to change the way we think about things and our expectations for how quickly things might happen. But I think there are a lot of similarities and things that we can learn from each other. And I think there's always a way to leverage knowledge from another place or another sector.
And Laura, I want to pick up on that because, outreach and communications is so important to advancing the practice of, in our case, engineering with nature, but advancing the practice and the implementation of nature-based solutions. And, one of the things that we've talked a lot about on this podcast, including in our most recent series with Catherine Hayhoe, who's the chief scientist in the Nature Conservancy, is really the need to communicate about climate change and demonstrate in very tangible ways the important role of nature-based solutions. So you're the co-editor-in-chief of the Nature-Based Solutions Journal. You're also the co-editor of a handbook for practitioners that's entitled Evaluating Impact of Nature-Based Solutions, which I understand was commissioned by the European Commission and published in 2021. Can you talk a little bit about why the journal and the handbook are such important tools in advancing the practice of nature-based solutions?
Sure. And I completely agree with you that communicating, disseminating everything that we know is core. If we do great science and we don't talk about it, it's like it's never been done.
Right.
We can't do science in secret. We should be telling everybody what we're doing and sharing our results widely, including the things that don't work. And this was one of the things that we talked a lot about in the Urban Nature Labs project through our task forces. So I'm going to talk about evaluating the impact of nature-based solutions handbook first, because this kind of happened a little bit before the journal. We started work in Urban Nature Labs project in 2017, and we were amongst the first, I think, 7 or 8 projects that was funded by the European Commission focused on nature-based solutions. There was a cadre of 4 projects that started at the same time, and we call them our sister projects. So if you hear me saying sister projects, that's what I mean. Now I believe there are around 76 projects in total that have been funded by the European Union and are focused on nature-based solutions. But when we started, it was really kind of in its infancy, and there were a lot of drivers to start to bring what we knew together. So not work solely through individual projects, but to compile what we were learning through our projects into these more synthesized outputs. So we were encouraged to form task forces. And the task forces are managed by Network Nature, which is a knowledge platform for nature-based solutions. And the task forces are still going, even though I'm not personally involved. The task force I was involved with was called NBS Impact Assessment, I think, or understanding the impact of nature-based solutions. And we got together and realized that what we really needed was a handbook that would guide practitioners through the process, not only of measuring the impact, but how do you go about setting up a nature-based solutions action? what makes it an NBS action, and then how do they plan monitoring and evaluation so that they can eventually monitor the impact. So we wrote what we thought was a very, very short and succinct handbook at 300 pages. Apparently, it's less succinct than some would have hoped. But that can't hold a candle to the, nearly 1,200 page appendix of methods, where we gathered up all of the methods. And so again, we were so excited. We identified 12 societal challenge areas where nature-based solutions can have a positive contribution. And then in each of these, we defined what we thought was a short list of, I think, 447 unique indicators spread across 12 areas. So, we're being reasonable here. And then we wanted to find a method, a recommended method to measure this. And the whole idea behind this is we need to synthesize information, and we need to be able to compare not only across projects, but across regions and different types of nature-based solutions. So we wanted a comprehensive evidence base. But to establish that evidence base and to have comparable data, we need to measure the same things and measure it the same way. And if you've ever worked with a large group of experts, it's very hard to get us to agree on anything, because we all think that we know the best way, right?
Yes.
So I'm sure you can imagine the fun that was involved in identifying the best method for measuring 447 indicators. So all I can say is I have immense gratitude for all of the experts that we worked with, everyone who contributed and did so in such good faith, and I'm so proud of the output. It's not one of these things that's set in stone, and it's going to evolve and get better with time as we learn more. But that was the first chance that we had to start to compile all of our knowledge. And I think it was E.O. Wilson that said, "We're drowning in information, but starved for knowledge." I'm paraphrasing here. And I think that's how we felt at the time. Like, we had all this sort of anecdotal and piecemeal evidence, and we need to find a way to bring it together so that we can synthesize it and turn that data, that information, into knowledge. And we really hope that the Nature-Based Solutions Journal then provides an additional place for us to talk about this, a forum for discourse, to synthesize what we've learned and report not only the things that work well, but the things that maybe didn't work so well, so that we can share learnings. And I don't know, Jeff and Sarah, have you experienced this when we read about reports about all the things that went well, the success stories, but how often do we hear about the stuff that really went pear-shaped?
Yeah.
And that's what everybody wants to know, right? All the project managers that we've talked to, that's what they want to know. But what about the other things? So,
well, just building on this thread, Laura, and what you've described is just perfect in terms of the learnings and the synthesis of the handbook. And I look forward to reviewing that myself. It sounds incredibly interesting and right up our alley in terms of the EWN program. But maybe just sort of to echo exactly what you just described, we find it very, very important to be able to get information out to the public as well as practitioners. So most recently, we released Atlas Volume 3, which showcases nature-based solution type projects from around the world. And we are certainly excited to have that one be made available to the public because, as you know, it's not enough just to be able to communicate from practitioner to practitioner or from scientist to scientist. The public needs to be able to understand what these projects are all about too. And that atlas, which is like a coffee table style book, helps those people in the public, in communities, to better understand the importance of these kinds of projects and what they look like on the landscape. And then also, we've tried very hard to be able to communicate and also quantify the benefits derived from these projects as well. And so we showcased a lot of that kind of work through a Measuring What Matters summit that was held in December of 2022. And that's also highlighted in one of our podcasts. I believe that was season 5, episode 4. And again, the idea here is that we make available information and reports that offer the practitioner information about how you can actually quantify these benefits and what what it means to be able to quantify those benefits from the standpoint of justifying a nature-based solution project as part of a broader approach to creating resilience that actually can reduce risk from natural hazards. And then finally, really getting at this point of nature, the importance of nature, and what we are striving to do as a country at a national level with our national nature assessment. And we talked a little bit about that as well with one of our episodes, season 5, episode 3, I believe we went into a lot of detail concerning the national nature assessment and the importance of that. And again, being able to offer information to the public in terms of why we need to think more about prioritizing nature. It does make a difference, and we must, frankly, do a better job of having nature figure into our overall approach to how we create resilience and broaden benefits for all of our citizens.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's really important to convey our message to people outside the scientific community. As scientists, we're really good at talking to each other and sharing the results of our latest cool study, with people who think the same way that we do and understand things the same way that we do. So to talk with people in different sectors, we need to present information in different ways. And I think a couple of the sectors that we traditionally haven't been as good at talking with are, say, the public policy sector.
Mm-hmm.
We need better evidence that can help to underpin evidence-based policy. And we also need the data, the knowledge to create financing and business models to show that we can have a return on investment from nature-based solutions or engineering with nature, so that this can become mainstream. But we fundamentally need that scientific evidence for both of these things.
Right.
And we need to communicate it maybe better than we have been. But I do think we're getting a lot better than we were, say, a few decades ago.
Well, that's absolutely true, Laura. And with folks like you out there leading the charge, I suspect our opportunity to grow and learn is going to continue and increase exponentially. And I think there's so much for us to learn about. And I, Laura, am particularly interested in hearing more about the policies, those policies that are driving strategies for inclusion of nature-based solutions in Europe. But that's a whole nother conversation, Laura, and I'm hopeful that you will come back and you'll be part of another episode that will air focused on that particular topic.
Indeed, I'd love to. Thanks for the invitation, Jeff.
That's awesome. I think that we really do need to talk about policy. We need to talk about decision making. Those are really critical components in moving this whole practice and of nature-based solutions along. So definitely, we're going to look forward to picking your brain on that, Laura, when we have a conversation in season 7, episode 13. It will be a perfect way to wrap up season 7, which has been, frankly, a really awesome season for the Engineering with Nature podcast. So, Laura, thank you for this really stimulating conversation. You got Jeff and I thinking. You've given us so much insight, really, into the unique climate challenges in cold regions and some really interesting and kind of really practical thinking about hybrid solutions, integrating nature-based solutions into more traditional solutions that are going to build resilience. So thank you for joining us on the Engineering with Nature podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Laura, I feel like we're kindred spirits, so looking forward to this next conversation.
Me too. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. And to all of you, thank you so much for listening. We hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. We certainly hope you'll join us again when we talk about engineering with nature.
You've been listening to the EWN podcast, developed by Sarah Thorne and Jeff King, National Lead, Engineering with Nature Initiative, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, for more information, you can visit our website, engineeringwithnature.org. The EWN podcast is produced by iContact Productions for the Engineering with Nature program within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm Dave Trafford.